Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. My name is Pushpendra Mehta and my guest for today is Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner, Strategic Treasurer. Welcome back to the Open Treasury podcast, Craig.
Push, it's good to be here. I've been enjoying our discussions and your writing on different leading practices, so thank you.
Thank you, Craig. For the benefit of our CTMfile audience, we will begin our conversation by discussing the 10th topic and the 11th article in a series on leading practices in corporate treasury, published on CTMfile.com. This article is about compliance. Craig, compliance may not be top of mind for most large organizations, but it is close. Having a compliance-oriented mindset is considered critical to corporate treasury because it is now or increasingly has become an important way to wade through a continual stream of regulations to protect the business against a range of internal and external exposures and risks. As a treasury expert, what would you advise or what would your recommendations be to develop a compliance-oriented mindset?
Whether you think about compliance as a necessary evil or necessary good, either one of those views still carries with it the necessity part. It's necessary to comply. Now, there's different levels of compliance. There's different levels of regulations that are from serious to extremely serious, and depending on the industry and other factors, but there's a necessary component to it. So that's a core part of any mindset. The other thing on a compliance-oriented mindset is reflective of both of those views. You know, are you complying just because you have to? Or if you have to comply, do you take advantage of the fact that you have to do extra steps, change processes, change mindsets, educate people to make those changes in a way that adds value, even if the overall impact might be a net cost, but are you still making those changes in a way that makes them the least painless or the most beneficial? And those are the two types of the positive and negative view, the glass half full, glass half empty. What are you doing when you're making these changes? Are you just complying, or are you trying to improve other things as part of that? That's a second component of it. I think the third thing in terms of advice or recommendations is, well, it's really about the mindset. And, we think about, compliance activities, things that come up in several time domains, let's say 4. One is something that's established, something that's been around for a while. You're used to it. You just expect it. Nobody thinks anything of it. It's been something that's been around, 8 years, 10 years or more. And it's just natural, like putting on a seatbelt. It's like you don't even think about it after a while. So those would be established items. Your organization just does it naturally and thinks it's weird if you don't. The second would be new, things that have just been put in place. And that usually takes a number of years from a new regulation that's come out. You're trying to get compliant. You're optimizing, figuring out how it works. And there's usually a period of significant risk that you're not going to be compliant, that you're going to break other processes. That's a second area that requires quite a bit of care in watching how you put it into place. Don't just layer in extra costs without figuring out how to, optimize what you're doing and gain those other benefits. So that's the fairly new items. And then there's the items that are more recent. They're about to come into play. There's a lot of discussion. You might hear it from your nation's government or any consortium that happens, or maybe it's a state or a confederation group talking about different regulations. So this is a period of monitoring what goes on and preparing for things. So those items, something's coming out. There might be comment periods. Could be on anything from know your customer to bank account management to foreign bank account reporting to controls about payments to money market fund regulations. There's just a massive number of things that can be coming forth. And we have to be alert and stay informed about what's occurring, what's likely to happen. And that's where you're doing some, at least mental preparation of how are we going to comply with this regulation that's forthcoming? What are our exposures to it? Are we going to be able to comply with it the way we operate currently? Do we have the data, the processes? Do people understand what's necessary? And so that's really important. And then finally, there's the era or the element of the possible regulations that come up. These are ideas that are floated. Someone or several people are talking about this regulation or that regulation. It's farther away. And that's really where you just want to keep your ear to the ground about that, to just hear, okay, there's a distant rumbling. What is this about? Let's monitor that. Monitoring with care and doing some planning for potential ones. And then there's the new, being very careful, and there's established areas. And I always think of, we had a Marine who worked for us, and he was always colorful with how he said things, not in a concerning way, but he always talked about the alligator closest to the boat. And for those of you who are familiar with alligators or crocodiles, they're not that aggressive. If you're in a boat, you're pretty much okay. But the image is, how close is the alligator to the boat? But there's a couple other nuances there. There's the size of the alligator and the direction they're moving. And I guess probably, are you in the boat or out of the boat if you're, so there's a couple more nuances that we could calibrate that imagery. But, once something's established, it doesn't, matter how big the alligator is. You're running smoothly. You have the things in place to do it. The new ones are probably the most risky. New things are taking place. People are making mistakes, but monitoring what's going on is, another way to look at it. So we look at those things about, you put a chart out there that shows these different categories of established all the way to possible. And what are you doing in each of these areas? One's already resolved. You have all your processes in place. Your reporting's done. The other, you're doing a lot of checking for several years after new regulations are in place, to monitoring and assessing new regulations. And then finally, just keeping your ear to the ground of what's possible out there. I know that's a really long answer to a short question, but this idea of knowing where those are, calibrating those, whether you think about them as the alligator closest to the boat, which direction the alligator is, how big is the alligator, those are some components that help us focus on, what do we need to think about to what do we need to do?
Excellent, Craig. Craig, you've always said there should be a clear assignment of responsibilities and accountability for individuals who track existing, new, and potential compliance activities. Now, we all know it is imperative to do so, but in your mind, when it comes to outlining responsibilities and accountability, can you talk about the difference between this demarcation of responsibility and accountability, and is it just enough to assign these responsibilities, or is it important to be accountable to it? And what is the role of accountability in this?
I'm always of the mindset that those are associated and never de-linked or decoupled. And that's certainly not the case. The idea that you assign areas of compliance to different people to follow, to track, to ensure what's going on matters a lot. And so when you get to the point of you're responsible and you're accountable, responsibility for, let's say, doing your foreign bank account reporting, making sure accounts are dropped, you're complying with the regulations, you're getting things sent in on time, it's accurate, it's validated. There's an element of both. Someone has the responsibility, and then someone is checking to make sure that's done, and then they're held accountable in terms of performance, stay in position. Are they going to get other opportunities and other responsibilities where they'll get compensated for it? There's a link there for that. It's a little different when you start looking at emerging or soon to be implemented regulations. I think those are, there needs to be a responsibility for who's tracking it. And the accountability, I think, is a departmental accountability in that everyone has to do it, keep track of their areas, report to the group, and share what's going on. And there's a self-policing accountability there as well for the group to stay current. If there were only one regulation coming up every couple of years, everyone could be reading on it, keeping track of it. But that's not the case. And since it's not the case, there needs to be a bit of a divide and conquer, but not divide without any type of responsibility. You might want to be aware of 10 or 12 regulations that are either new or emerging, and what your organizational response is or will need to be. But that doesn't mean you're going to be a master about all those things. It might be this group is working on all the payments. This is working on the bank account and other regulations that come from different sides of the regulatory complex, but dividing, but still you don't wash your hands of it fully. You want to stay current. You'll ask questions. You hear other articles. You pass them on to the people. So there's an area of focus. Everyone has their role. People are focused, but you're not oblivious to everything else that's occurring.
Know your customer compliance or KYC compliance requirements pose considerable challenges for corporate treasurers operating internationally because of increasingly the regulatory scrutiny around money laundering and disparate regulatory regimes in different parts of the world. This is where treasury management technology may not be the solution to regulatory compliance, but does play an important role in enabling data to be collated, in reporting in the appropriate format, in implementing processes and controls, and also in easing the challenges of meeting KYC requirements. When it comes to technology, do you see emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning helping in regulatory compliance, helping in easing the challenges of meeting KYC requirements? And if so, how?
If your question was on technology, generally, certainly yes. And your question was more specific on AI and machine learning, my answer is yes, but I want to give a little more qualifications to that. So it is a firm yes. And in terms of how I think about it, auditors are using this type of technology very heavily for doing their audits. This is changing their industry heavily. There's not as many people pouring through the books. They're using tools, technology tools, to go through, we call it reams of data, massive amounts of data, to pull out items where someone will look at, or it'll cull and do the digging for them. This is definitely changing what's going on. This ability to sift through and identify those types of items is far greater than any just query that existed. And since it's changing that industry, which is in one sense a compliance industry, we know that it'll change the other areas by default, even if we can't think of all those other areas where it can change. But we can think about some of those other areas, how these type of tools can change. And so just thinking forward, there's two areas that I would answer yes in the future about, AI and ML for compliance. One is yes within systems, and yes with external to an individual system. The earlier one that seems to be more relevant and gaining more traction has to do within systems or different tools, whether it's a banking system, a FX trading platform, a treasury management system, a payment hub. All of those, all the major ones, are quickly adding machine learning capabilities to detect fraud or detect anomalies or detect errors. And so many of those items, those types of situations, fraud may not be compliance, but detecting anomalies can help with, your overall control framework. So the idea that these tools can help detect anomalies or detect patterns that you either tell the system to look out for or the system discovers on its own can help and does help with compliance in different areas. And so we expect that to continue to grow, especially within systems. Think about payments and, sanction screening and comparing lists and doing validations and checking to see what's changed and helping people to focus on, is this a false positive for a compliance issue? Okay, we can release the payment. It's good, and we'll track and learn from that, versus this looks different. Is this a potential fraud, or is this a potential sanctioned party? What's the search and match criteria? So that activity within a system is here in many areas and growing rapidly. The functionality is increasing. The second part of that push on the yes across systems, think about compliance. If everything's in one system and your vendor puts that functionality within that system, that is excellent, because it's optimized. Many companies benefit from that. It's checking and looking at that data. It's helping to run these different types of rules or the learning behaviors. But the other thing that happens, I'm a little less sure on exactly how this will happen, but here's some of the thinking there, is when we look across systems, if everything's in one system, your vendor provided tools are going to be the best at finding that. But think about how much data is being generated, how many different systems and data sources you have. And not all of them lend themselves to stuffing them full with all of your other data. Sticking all of your other data into your AP, all of your other data into your TMS, all of your other data into some of your spreadsheet tracking things. You're not going to do that. There's lots of places for financial data, and they don't sit in one system. I know people try to do that, make this massive set, but there's going to be multiple locations for this data. And so you have to have systems that will check across data sets, not just look internally, but look across the board. And so, if we think about the idea that maybe people are putting this type of data into data lakes that they're querying, they're running, not only natural language search, but queries against this, they can pull stuff, they can do compliance activities or do comparisons in a way that isn't possible in one system. I mean, I'll just give you some examples that highlight the type of thinking here is, if we talk about know your customer, we talk about signers on accounts, we want to grant people access to the systems that they should have access to, and we want to enforce that. We have different ways of doing that. We might use some type of federation, where you might use SAML2 or some other federated system where it says the rights and permissions are here in Active Directory or Microsoft Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. Those rights and permissions are there. And then the other systems tap into that permissioned or federated approach for who can do what. And so if someone leaves, they're kicked out of the Active Directory or their status changes, which has this ripple effect to every other system because that's where the permission is granted. What we need to think about there too is that if you're looking at something like signers, you might have signers and you might have multiple systems. There's signers at a bank. They're in your treasury system. They're in your payment hub. They're somewhere else. It's not just about access. It's also about what are people doing and where are they and what permissions they have. So it's beyond just pure compliance, but it's someone has left. You acquire 2 other companies. They're in 3 different federated systems. You have 20 different banking platforms, 2 treasury systems, 6 ERPs. So all of that is how do you do that? And so some of the functions of checking compliance, validating activities, ensuring anomalies might be to pull that data into a place where it can check across the board and say, something's not in sync here. Here's people that have authorization. They're not in any HR system. Oh, that didn't link. It wasn't part of a automated process. Here's an exception. And so that can be something simple like, how do I be efficient and make sure I don't have problems, all the way up to have a good control framework that's a requirement for my compliance activities. So I think people can probably understand that ability to handle massive amounts of data that need to be collated and understood has to occur, whether you're pulling into a data lake or you're inquiring it with, APIs. There's an aspect that'll be across systems that we have to be looking at for compliance.
Craig, the Office of Foreign Assets Control mandates complete corporate clients with their regulations, comprehensive and targeted sanction screening of suppliers and customers with a self-imposed system of checks should be undertaken as a part of an effective OFAC compliance program. Corporations are also known to make erroneous payments, from accidental double invoicing to willful acts of employee or vendor fraud. What would be your key recommendations, maybe just 1 or 2 recommendations for payment screening and payments control?
Screen before you load someone into your payment system and screen before every single payment. There should be some automated process, something consistent across the organization. It sounds easier if you have one single system and you only have to match this up once, but you need to do that screening before any payments made, and it should be done at the point of setup. And that can look different. You can use tools, services that help that. You can recreate everything for every single system you have. And so that's where things like payment hubs and some of the treasury providers give you some features there. So that's one, in terms of screening. On the control side, I'll give you a couple. One is about the files and 2 is about the people. And I know the people part's going to sound boring, but on the control side, I want people to think about controlling files. How do you control files? Ensure they're not tampered with. Not just that the total amount of the transfers on a payment file aren't tampered with, but any part of the file isn't tampered with at any point in the process. Not that it's sitting someplace that can be tampered with in 2 seconds before there's a scheduled pull, but that it's not available to be tampered with anywhere. It's encrypted, it's hashed, data is removed. There's a number of components under that file control that allowed me to say a bunch of things under that without running afoul of your question. The other has to do with training. I mean, we talk about the human firewall. Mm-hmm. You've heard us talk about that. Adrian Turpak from TD Bank has used that phrase a number of times. We oftentimes just think about the physical firewall, the digital firewall. The human firewall is far less funded, far less strengthened, far more the cause of many of these problems. And that needs to be strengthened very, very heavily. Not just, hey, let's do a couple of courses on don't stick thumb drives into your computer and phishing is a problem. People need to know that about payment security too. And they don't. They think they've covered it by talking about, phishing, farming, vishing, smishing, whatever, and they're done, and they are not done. And that's why there's a lot of problems there. That's more on the control side.
Craig, as you know, corporations should view compliance with laws, rules, and regulations as zero tolerance activity. Nevertheless, the time spent on each compliance activity must be differentiated according to the organization's highest vulnerabilities, sensitivities, and risks in non-compliance. How should corporations identify and size compliance risk exposure?
I think with that type of matrix I was alluding to in the beginning where I talked about where are the compliance activities, the regulations, are they long well established? Are they new? Are they emerging? They're about to become a reality, or they're just concepts, or early on. That's one way of scaling those. The other is the size. How big of an impact is it on the industry at large, but also to your organization? There's some regulations that are really significant and you're a company under 250 people, it doesn't apply, or under 50 people. That gets back to the alligators closest to the boat. How close are they to the boat? How big is the alligator? Are they moving towards you or away from you? I think it's the direction that they're facing. Those are just some of the broader concepts about what matters. So every regulation, you should have some kind of weighting on what does it take to comply? What does it cost to comply? What's the issue if you don't comply or if you run afoul? And not everything is, life and death. It's not binary. You're out of business if you don't do it. There's usually fines. So we have to calibrate some of those items and prioritize. And if you do that, less of these things are going to sneak up on you at the last minute if you have these assigned and people are tracking, monitoring, they're held accountable for it.
Thank you, Craig. Those were extremely insightful. I hope this conversation will be of tremendous benefit to our CTMfile audience, whom I would like to thank as well for joining us on this edition of Open Treasury. Please subscribe and look in the show notes for the article links. Thank you.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.